Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael Del Giorno and David Zanotti.
So just how important is the Senate? And why don't they ever seem to get anything done?
So 1850 Main Street, having coffee today with Rob Walgate of USA. Having coffee today with Rob Walgate from iVoters.com and my colleague at the American Policy Roundtable.
That was almost a Freudian slip, right? Or was that a Freudian slip? I was thinking usavoter.info. Can we take a little
I almost
blast to the past?
Yeah. We have been in the online voter information business for so long and have had so many different products that we've been able to present and profile and then change and move. We've been doing the whole system under iVoters.com for a very long time. We've got a lot of history here, 44 years in this field.
The good news is if you go to usavoter.info, it will send you to iVoters.com.
Yes. So let's talk now. We're talking about Congress, the importance of congressional races. It always is kind of funny. And I used to say this all the time until I started working full time in public policy. I would talk about Congress, and I was always just thinking about the House. The House and Congress meant the same thing. Well, no, Congress is actually a bicameral body. There are two bodies. There is the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate. They make up the Congress. That's what Article 1 is all about, the Congress. It's just the way we do things. It's how we got to shorthand, and sometimes our shorthand leads us right into a dead end because we end up with incomplete information. There is a thing called the United States Senate. Now, they try really hard to not be noticed. Have you witnessed that? They seem to disappear. You elect a member to Senate, disappears for 6 years, comes back, and actually elect them again. You may not hear from them for 6 years. I mean, there are people in Congress or in the United States Senate in particular who they go from election to election, and you don't even know that they're there until they ask you for one more vote.
The most exclusive club in the world, the Club of 100, the United States Senate.
So how important will the Senate be this time around?
Extremely, especially because we don't know who's going to win the White House. And the president of the Senate is the vice president of the United States. So if there's a 50-50 tie, the president of the Senate is the tie-breaking vote. So the goal, obviously, for both parties is to get to 51. That's the goal.
All right, so where are we now? How close is it in the U.S. Senate?
It's very close. It's 51-49 Democrats. And there was a lot of people that thought the Republicans would be able to take the Senate in 2022. I think looking back, they're going to be thankful that they didn't take the Senate in 2022 because they would be getting a lot of blame for nothing getting done, whereas they still wouldn't have been able to get anything done, even though they had the House and the Senate, because they didn't have the White House. So I think they're going to be thankful when it comes election time of 2024 that they didn't have control of the Senate.
So this thing is 51-49. Now, some people say, no, it's 48-3-49. There's 48 Democrats plus 3 independents. That makes, and then there's 49 Republicans. Well, who are we kidding? The 3 independents are to the left of the entire Democrat Party, which is really hard to get to. That includes Bernie Sanders and folks like that. But the truth is they always vote with the Democrat Party. So it's the same thing. It's 51-49. So, and I know this would seem like really simple math, but what does it take to change? I mean, is it 1 seat? Is it 2 seats? If it goes to 50, most of us forgot 8th grade civics. How does this work?
To have control, you're going to need either 51-49, as the Democrats have, or if you're 50-50, the vice president of the United States is the president of the Senate. So that would be the tie-breaking vote on any ties. So the goal of both parties is to get to 51. However, in the Senate, as we know, that really doesn't get anything done because you have cloture. You have that nothing. Yeah. I want to pull my hair out every time we talk about this because it drives me crazy.
Cloture. What is is that that's like a disease? What is cloture? Does that mean
It is a disease. It is a disease. It's basically, it's a rule. That's what it is. It's a rule. It's not a law. It's a rule in the United States Senate that nothing can be advanced. A bill can't be moved forward unless you have 60 members that agree that it should be moved forward.
have you got anybody in your family that was alive in 1919?
No. My great grandma passed away a couple years ago. She was 101.
So I think that the cloture idea started way back about that early in the 20th century. It was the early 1900s, almost not quite mid-1900s. It was the early 1900s, where the Senate decided that they didn't want any ideas like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where someone could actually hold the floor of the Senate indefinitely and uphold a vote. So they said, okay, we're going to be able to take a vote to shut you up. And that's how cloture started. Now the cloture has become the filibuster. And in a amazingly perverted methodology, if you study the history of this thing, the leadership of the United States Senate managed to take an idea that said we want to reasonably end debate so we can conduct business, protecting the free speech of the members who are elected to come here, but not letting them basically form a cabal that can talk out the clock for weeks at a time. We have to be reasonable here. We have to. When a point's been made, and you can't hold the entire Senate hostage for an entire session. So they created rules to reasonably end debate. Well, the powers of the United States Senate, the Club of 100, managed to morph this into a methodology where today, what started as something as simple as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, now is a situation where every bill, if you will, is presumed to be filibustered, and therefore no measure can come to a vote in the Senate unless 60% of the Senate, or 60 members, decide it's time to end any potential debate and move to a vote. So if we decide that we want to make jaywalking illegal, we can't make jaywalking illegal until 60% of the 100 say it's time to vote. Now, it could be crystal clear that 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 66, 7, 8, 9, a clear majority of the Senate want jaywalking to be illegal. But unless we can get to 60, jaywalking can't be made illegal. In essence, it destroys the concept of majority vote in the United States Senate, which means that we no longer have a Congress that operates by majority vote at all, because the House operates on a simple majority in almost every case. But you can't get through the Senate until you get to a supermajority. Most people don't know that's what's happening, and it was never placed in our Constitution.
Has it made the country better?
And Rob, you and I talk about this all the time. There are people who have been brainwashed by conservative talk show hosts, particularly on Fox News, and by members of the United States Senate that are Republicans, that if the filibuster were to disappear, the country as we know it would come to an end. And that is absolutely absurd.
It is so absurd, because what it would do if the filibuster, if cloture went away, and if you had control of the House and the Senate and the White House, and if you do have control of all those three things, then you should be able to get done what you want to get done.
Oh, but wait, that's too fast. That's fast. Rob, the Senate's supposed to be a deliberative body. They're supposed to slow down the fever rage of the House. They're supposed to work against the passions of the people. It should take forever to get through the Senate and require a 60% supermajority to pass any law, because the Senate knows better than the majority of everybody.
I know they're smarter than the rest of us, but I still think it would take longer. And if you don't believe they're smarter than the rest of us, just ask them. They'll tell you. But I believe it still would take longer, because those voters that are the 50th vote or the 51st vote or the 52nd vote, those close ones, they have to go back and run in their home district on their home state on those votes. I don't think they'd make those votes. Let's rewind the tape. Let's go back roughly 15 years and let's look when the Democrats had 60 in the Senate. They had the House. They had the White House. All these things they constantly scream about. Whether you want to talk about taxes, whether you want to talk about guns, whether you want to talk about abortion, what do you want to talk about? They had it all. They had it all. They could have done anything they wanted. They barely got healthcare done. Barely.
Thanks for stopping by at 1850 Main Street. We're glad you're here. Do you want to learn more about what is really going on behind the scenes in public policy? Tune in to the Public Square on over 200 radio stations coast to coast. Or download the free Public Square mobile app from your app store. Just look for the lamppost. Find out what America is really talking about at thepublicsquare.com.
They got Obamacare done, and it was such a bitter pill and so poorly done and executed that within a few months, when an open seat election for Ted Kennedy's seat happened in Massachusetts, when Senator Kennedy passed away, in a Democrat state, in a Democrat district that had been held by the Kennedys for generations, now you're in a situation, or decades, I should say, now you're in a situation where all of a sudden the Republicans win that seat in Massachusetts as outrage against Obamacare, and the Democrats lose their 60% supermajority, and then everything goes back into the slow mode again, because now nothing can happen because everything's brokered by cloture. So the point that you made earlier, which is if the votes really mattered, the voters would have more power to control the content, which is exactly what the Club of 100 in the Senate doesn't want. And if you think this is conspiratorial, I'm sorry, it's not conspiratorial. It's real. If you don't believe it, go spend a few days in Washington, D.C. and watch what happens. In fact, don't bother. 40 years ago, you could have done that. You could have actually had a tour. You could have actually met with representatives. You could have actually watched those people. But today, they all live underground and behind barriers because they don't want people to be able to see what they do. This is not the people's house anymore. It's a fortress town based upon political power brokers. And Rob, I know when we talk this, it's one of the reasons we do 1850, because we can talk frankly about this, because people come to 1850 to listen. Right? This is not the typical radio broadcast or the typical talk television conservative site where I've heard so many people completely propagandized and brainwashed by this idea that what you need is the filibuster to save you from your enemies taking control. When you take that approach, it also means that your friends can never get anything done either.
Obviously, for the work we do, we've been to D.C. numerous
way too many times for the good of our health.
We don't go there.
You know the rules: don't stay overnight and don't drink the water.
Yeah, and get a shower as soon as you get out. That being said, I can remember, I'm going to age myself here. The fall of 1994, I went to Washington, D.C. on a senior trip in high school. I was a senior in high school in the fall of 94. We went to D.C. And then 1 year ago, actually, this week, I went to Washington, D.C. on another trip. I chaperoned an 8th grade trip. My son's class in the 8th grade went, and it amazed me at the differences from 1994 to 2023 as far as access, as far as what we saw, as far as elected officials and how it was. And just, you could even tell, and this was the kind of sad part, of how polarizing the town has become.
The people are the enemy of the state, and the Congress serves as the agency of the state. That's what it feels like. It feels like you're in a freaky dystopian movie where, because you're a citizen, you're presumed to be guilty of something if you're even in the town. It's creepy. We've been doing this our whole life. It's not a healthy environment. It's not a healthy environment. Now, the way that we change that is to change the people that we send there. That's how we change this. Now, one other thing about the filibuster. If the filibuster were to, and this is a rule, this is not in the Constitution, if a majority of the United States Senate decided to change the filibuster rule, they could. They've already done it. The Democrats decided to do it in regards to federal judiciary appointments several years ago, and it was called the nuclear option, and the world would come to an end. Well, they did it. Harry Reid made it happen, and it was supposed to be the end of the world. Then, interestingly enough, Donald Trump became president, and he appointed a lot more justices than the Democrats had been able to appoint. So it suddenly worked. The shoe was on the other foot. Now Joe Biden comes back in, and now the shoe's on the other foot. And now there's conversation about, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to end the filibuster in regards to other pieces of legislation. We dropped it now on Supreme Court justices. Now maybe it's time to end it for all legislative matters. Maybe it is time. It's already falling apart because people are catching on to it. Now, what it would mean, and this is where it's probably not going to happen for a while, it would mean that if 50 votes in the Senate meant policy would change, if the House agrees, suddenly the people who are in the Senate would make a whole lot more difference. We couldn't let them hide for 6 years and then come back and run every 6 years, because you never know what they're doing anyhow. Because with cloture, they can say, I'm for this bill on jaywalking. Yeah, you better believe I support the bill on jaywalking. So, and if that bill gets to the floor, you better believe I'll vote on it.
But it isn't getting to the floor because 60 can't agree to put it there.
And here's the thing: when you have a cloture vote, it's not a vote on jaywalking; it's a vote on cloture. So they can turn around and lie to you and say, "I supported jaywalking in committee. I voted for that bill. Yeah, I just didn't vote for cloture."
And the other thing we always talk about is the fact that the United States Senate is a representation of the states. It's not a representation of the population.
That's right.
That was the intent of it.
That's why
and a lot of people today scream about
little states like North Dakota that have one member of Congress have 2 senators, because little states matter as much as big states.
Yes, the foresight of that. I mean, the understanding of how important that would be. And when people talk about the slowing down or the dulling of something, that's where the Senate has to have the deliberation. I'll tell you what, that fact helps in that process, because they don't go by mob rule. And I appreciate that.
So this year, the U.S. Senate, it obviously it could either stay 51-49. It could switch. It could flip. There's been all kind of hype about in polls that, there's all these races that are being contested. Honestly, what do you see? Watching the numbers at iVoters, watching the data, watching the races, what races matter? Are there many of them?
Well, there's a handful of them. I think people are going to watch West Virginia closely. West Virginia currently represented by Joe Manchin. I think it's a foregone conclusion that will switch from the Democrat Joe Manchin, who is retiring, to a Republican.
Okay, so that makes it 50-50.
Yes, that makes it 50-50. You're looking at Arizona. That race is kind of up in the air. You have an incumbent that was going to go and run as an independent that is now not going to run at all. So that Arizona will be watched closely. And you also have Montana. Montana is currently as a Democrat that represents them, but Montana has a Republican that represents them in the House. And can that Democrat continue to win in Montana? I think those are states that will be watched closely, as well as Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Ohio. I think people around the country are saying Ohio is a toss-up. As someone who is a resident of Ohio, that seat is currently held by a Democrat, Sherrod Brown. And right now, I do not see him. Here we are in April, but I do not see him losing in November. Plenty can change until November. I'm just telling you how it looks from the ground in Ohio right now.
Open seat in Michigan, make any difference?
Here's my thing about Michigan. I look at everything that Gretchen Whitmer did in Michigan during COVID, and I just shake my head. And she was able to win re-election. So I don't think it's going to make a difference. I don't see Michigan switching parties just based on what we've seen in results from Michigan over the past few years.
So best I can come up with is there's about 6 seats that are in play for the 3 of them in play for the Dems, 3 of them possibly in play for the R's, and only one that looks like it's definitely going to be a flip. So who knows? I mean, the Senate is very, very, very close at this stage in the game. It's not some potential wave on either side.
Yeah, and some people would say, well, maybe you should talk about Wisconsin and Pennsylvania more because, Donald Trump won those in 2016. He did. He won them by a small margin. He did not win
he lost them in 2020. Yeah.
So what has changed between 2020 and 2024 to say that he's going to win those seats? Or the Republicans, are going to win those seats. I guess I say he because everyone is
right. They're assuming there's a coattail.
Going to be the nominee. Yeah. So that or the other question becomes: are people that are saying that are conservative or on the right that would consider themselves, and I know you're not supposed to use air quotes during audio, but air quotes, never Trumpers, will they be willing to not vote top of the ticket, but vote for the Republican Senate candidate in those respective states? There's a lot that could play out in the 2024 election. I think a lot of people thought the Republicans were going to take over the Senate in 2022. That didn't happen. What's going to happen in 2024? It's going to be an exciting ride.
So a lot of people say, okay, you give me a headache because you didn't make all the happy ending either way. You didn't make the story. Now, what do I do with all that? Well, you go to ivoters.com. Why? Because it pushes all of this back to us, particularly if you're in a state where you're not really sure what you think about who should be representing you in the Senate, or you're not sure about the races in the House. But there's another reason to go to ivoters.com. And that's if you've got people that live in these states where these races, and there's not a whole bunch of them. We're talking about Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Montana, Ohio, West Virginia. If you know people that live in those states, you can send them the link to iVoters. You don't have to tell them who to vote for. iVoters won't tell them who to vote for, but they can find out for themselves a whole lot of information. And sometimes by you simply sending them information, they do their homework, they get inspired for one reason or another to participate. Maybe they wouldn't have been inspired at all to do that. So iVoters is a tool not just for me and my voting, but it's a tool by which I can encourage other people to do their homework so that they can feel like they vote with confidence.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. And if you want more, check out Your Morning Show and The Public Square. Your Morning Show is where you can hear Michael and David talking about the stories of the day every day. And you can learn more about what's really going on behind the scenes in public policy at The Public Square. You can listen to Your Morning Show and The Public Square on the iHeart mobile app and on radio stations across the country. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.